What if the Crusaders had ended up in Japan? A stormy sea and unknown currents brought the Crusaders to a land they could never have expected to see. The shores of Japan, cut by emerald forests and misty mountains, where each island seemed to hold its own secret. The landscape was alien to their usual expedition routes. Steep slopes, terraced rice fields, narrow river channels, and dense bamboo thickets created natural obstacles for heavy cavalry and long lines of foot knights accustomed to the flat fields of Europe. Their first encounters with Japanese warriors, samurai in full armor and wielding weapons they had wielded since childhood, shocked the Crusaders. Bows, katanas, naginata, and spears seemed simultaneously light and deadly precise. Their movements were precise and flexible, and their tactics were striking in their discipline and mobility, unusual for Europeans. The initial clashes were chaotic but tense. The Crusaders tried to maintain formation, build phalanxes, use shields and swords, and organize their cavalry into wedges, while the samurai played with space, creating false positions, concealing ambushes, using forests and rivers as natural barriers, and maneuvering so that every blow seemed calculated. Reaction analysis showed that the samurai moved faster, their longbow arrows piercing light armor and forcing the European fighters to seek cover, while the Crusader cavalry faced the problem of terrain. Narrow paths and rocky slopes slowed their speed and disrupted the density of their formation, while Japanese archers from the higher ground controlled the area, creating deadly killing zones. On the Crusader side, a concentration of forces was observed. Commanders tried to adapt familiar formations, using heavy infantry as mobile fortifications, advancing in lines with swords and spears, while simultaneously trying to provide cover for the archers. However, the samurai skillfully split the phalanx, created diversionary maneuvers, surrounded small groups, and kept the enemy off balance, demonstrating the principle of seesaw, simultaneously pressing and retreating. Sudden attacks by lightly armored Japanese cavalry, who used speed and precision to outflank the Crusaders, led to localized chaotic battles, where each knight realized that the usual discipline and heaviness of armor could become a trap. Analysis of arrow movement, the distances between spear strikes, and the synchronization of attacks revealed that Japanese tactics were more of an evolution of reactive combat, where speed of decision-making and the ability to exploit space were valued over force. Against the backdrop of these battles, the geography of the islands acted as a natural generator of strategies. Narrow bridges over rivers became focal points where the Crusaders could gather strength, but also became vulnerable to bows and ambushes. The hills and terraced rice fields allowed the samurai to observe and regulate the battlefield, choosing the optimal moment to attack, with every move calculated to minimize casualties and maximize effectiveness. Tensions arose within the Crusader line. Some knights, accustomed to direct force, attempted to break through the center of the samurai lines, but encountered flexible blades and maneuvering strikes, while commanders tried to maintain discipline through rigid commands, which gradually lost their effectiveness due to the unfamiliar environment and the unusual dynamics of the enemy. Signaling systems familiar to Europeans, including trumpets, drums, and banners, were limited in their effectiveness. Fog, wind, and difficult terrain reduced the effectiveness of command transmission, while the samurai used more localized signals, shouts, banner movements, a combination of sound and gesture, allowing groups to act autonomously yet in sync with the overall strategy. The Crusaders began to adapt. They established mobile skirmishing positions. Small cavalry groups attempted to exploit flanking routes and constructed temporary fortifications on high ground, but every step required incredible concentration and coordination. Meanwhile, Japanese discipline and knowledge of the terrain allowed them to control not only the battle, but also the enemy's morale. Individual knights were caught in traps, individual groups were isolated, and locals observed the battle from a safe distance, potentially influencing the dynamics of the fighting. By the end of the first day, despite the Crusaders' numerical superiority and the strength of their heavy cavalry, the samurai were able to hold key positions, adapting their tactics to the unpredictable actions of the Europeans, while demonstrating that spatial strategy, speed, and precision strikes could outweigh brute force. Movement maps showed that the Crusaders were losing their effectiveness on difficult terrain, while Japanese maneuvers created the illusion of spatial control, which had a profound effect on morale on both sides, creating the feeling that every split second and every meter of space was decisive. On the second day of the confrontation, tension reached its climax when the Crusaders began to use their artillery and missiles more actively, unaware that the Japanese had already studied the trajectories and speeds of arrows and stones, choosing positions on high ground to neutralize the threat. The samurai used terraces and forests as natural fortifications, creating false lines of defense, forcing the Europeans to expend resources on ineffective attacks while simultaneously preparing covert counterattacks. Each encounter was accompanied by a rapid analysis of distances and attack angles. The Crusaders attempted to use long swords and heavy halberds, but during sharp turns and unexpected changes of direction, the samurai easily evaded them, delivering precise blows to exposed armor. A study of the Crusader cavalry's movements revealed that speed on flat ground dropped sharply in rough terrain, allowing the samurai to maneuver around wedges, encircle groups, and create the effect of multiple attack fronts. The knights, meanwhile, used their heavy spears to break through lines, but each attempt was met with disciplined use of the naginata, with which the Japanese warriors repelled the pressure and simultaneously established new positions, creating a dynamic movement of the fighting forces. Throughout the day, both sides adapted. The samurai employed the reverse wave principle, retreating under pressure to draw the Crusaders into narrow passages and ambushes where the European knights lost their numerical and spatial advantages, while the Crusaders analyzed new tactics, attempting to organize mobile groups to outflank the enemy. The island's terrain became a true strategic factor. Forested areas, fast-flowing rivers, rocky slopes, and terraces transformed each battle into a complex matrix, where calculating angles of attack and distances could determine the outcome of a local clash. Accurate strikes by Japanese archers, even from distant positions, forced the Crusaders to maintain a tight formation, but every step was controlled by the enemy, who anticipated weak points and used natural barriers to block cavalry. Between the skirmish lines, separate duels and raids unfolded. Small groups of samurai outflanked the cavalry, isolated the knights, and struck from the rear, while the Europeans attempted to create enveloping wedges, but the narrow paths limited maneuverability, forcing rapid reorganizations and rapid infantry shifts. Visual observations revealed that the Japanese units worked in sync, although each group operated autonomously, using a system of signals, the movement of banners, shouts, and gestures that allowed them to instantly react to the actions of the Crusaders, creating the impression that the samurai possessed not only discipline, but also a collective mind. Subsequent clashes degenerated into a veritable chess match. The Crusaders attempted to use the force of numbers and the weight of their armor to break through, while the samurai used agility, precision, and knowledge of the terrain to control the area. Each attack was accompanied by instant strategic adjustments, and each maneuver required commanders to instantly analyze and predict the enemy's reaction. By mid-afternoon, the Crusaders managed to capture one of the terraces using a combination of artillery and massive infantry pressure, but the Japanese quickly reformed their lines, and using concealed marksmen and lightly armored cavalry, created a counter-ramming front that forced the Europeans to retreat and regroup. The effectiveness of samurai tactics was so high that the Crusaders began to map positions and movements, studying firing ranges and angles of approach, attempting to synchronize their attacks. but the terrain and the enemy's flexibility rendered any calculations incomplete. Psychological factors played a significant role. The Crusaders, accustomed to direct force and massive attacks, were faced with unexpected mobility and sudden counterattacks, which lowered morale and forced commanders to make risky decisions. The samurai skillfully exploited this effect, creating false threats, deceiving attention, and breaking up the formation. By the end of the second day, both sides realized that victory required adaptation and a synthesis of tactics. The Crusaders began deploying reconnaissance parties, using light infantry and small cavalry patrols to control choke points, while the samurai fortified their positions and developed a system of rapid maneuvers for encirclement and localized attacks. Mutual respect for the enemy's skill emerged before the eyes of all participants. The Crusaders were amazed by the precision and coordination of the samurai, while the samurai were impressed by the strength and endurance of the European infantry. Every attack, every maneuver was recorded, analyzed, and used to plan future battles. By evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a soft orange glow over the forests and terraces, both armies had suffered defeats and successes, but neither could achieve a decisive victory. Every step of the Crusaders was measured by the samurai. Every maneuver of the samurai was tracked by the knights. Night fell, and both sides retreated to regroup, establishing temporary camps where every arrow, every infantry line, and every cavalry wedge were analyzed. New strategies were planned, positions and efforts adjusted for the next day to transform the unknown land into a battlefield where speed, precision, discipline, and spatial awareness would be key factors in the outcome of the battle.